Welcome to Myth and Moonlight, where stories meet the night. I'm your host, Aaron, and tonight I invite you to journey with me through a world of wonder and tranquility. Each night I share these stories not just to entertain, but to guide you toward peaceful rest. They're crafted to help your mind unwind and your body settle into the deep relaxation that precedes sleep. Tonight, we'll be traveling to a realm of mystical winter mountains, where ancient beings of legend still dwell. We'll explore snow-covered peaks, discover hidden valleys, and perhaps encounter wisdom as old as the mountains themselves. The journey will unfold gently, carrying you along its peaceful currents until you drift naturally into sleep. At its heart, this story reminds us that sometimes the most profound discoveries happen when we allow ourselves to be still, to listen, and to connect with the ancient rhythms that exist both in nature and within ourselves. It speaks to the quiet wisdom that emerges when we step away from the noise of everyday life. So find a comfortable position, somewhere you can remain undisturbed for the duration of our journey. Allow your body to be supported completely, and let your mind begin to soften its grip on the day's concerns. Our adventure awaits, but there's no rush. We have all the time we need. I invite you now to begin settling into a state of comfort and ease. Wherever you are, however you're positioned, take a moment to notice the points of contact between your body and the surface supporting you. Feel the way your weight is held completely and securely. There's something universally comforting about the mountains in winter, the profound silence that comes after fresh snow, the way sound travels differently in the cold, crisp air. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself, standing on a mountain overlook, watching your breath form clouds before you, feeling simultaneously small and significant amid such grandeur. Or maybe you've enjoyed the comfort of watching snow-covered peaks from the warmth of a cabin window, a hot drink warming your hands. These moments of contrast between cold and warmth, between vastness and intimacy, create a special kind of peace. Let's begin by allowing your body to release any unnecessary tension, starting with your feet. Notice any tightness in your toes, the arches of your feet, your ankles. Without effort, invite these areas to soften and relax. You might wiggle your toes slightly, then let them be still, feeling a pleasant heaviness develop. Move your awareness to your lower legs, your calves, your shins, your knees. With each breath out, imagine tension melting away from these muscles, leaving them comfortable and at ease. Your legs may begin to feel warm and heavy, sinking more deeply into the surface beneath you. Continue upward to your thighs and hips. These large muscles often hold considerable tension. As you breathe slowly and deeply, allow these areas to release completely. Feel the weight of your lower body increasing as it surrenders to gravity's gentle pull. Your abdomen and lower back now, places where we often carry stress without realizing it. With each breath in, feel these areas expand gently, and with each breath out, feel them grow softer, more relaxed. Allow your breathing to find its natural rhythm, unhurried and smooth. Your chest and upper back now receive your attention. Notice any tightness around your heart, your lungs, your shoulder blades. As you breathe in, imagine sending warm, relaxing energy to these places. As you breathe out, feel them letting go, opening, softening. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, releasing any burden they've you've been carrying. Feel how your neck lengthens naturally when your shoulders are relaxed. Your arms grow heavy and comfortable, from your shoulders all the way to your fingertips. Your hands may feel warm, perhaps with a gentle tingling as circulation flows freely. Finally, bring your awareness to your head and face. Release any tension in your jaw, letting your teeth part slightly. Allow your tongue to rest comfortably in your mouth, your cheeks, your nose, the space between your eyebrows, all becoming smooth and relaxed. Your forehead broadens and softens, and your scalp releases any tightness. Now, let's focus on your breath for a few moments. There's no need to change it. Simply notice the natural flow of air in and out of your body. Feel the cool air entering through your nose, filling your lungs, and then the warmer air leaving as you exhale. With each inhale, imagine drawing in peace and relaxation. With each exhale, imagine releasing anything that doesn't serve your rest. Notice how your breath moves your body. Perhaps your abdomen rises and falls gently. Perhaps you feel subtle movement in your chest or shoulders. Whatever you notice is perfect. As your breathing continues its steady rhythm, begin to visualize the setting for our journey tonight. Before you stretches a vast mountain range, peaks rising majestically against a clear winter sky. The mountains are covered in pristine snow that sparkles in the gentle afternoon sunlight. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the fresh scent of pine and the subtle mineral tang of snow. The valley where you find yourself is sheltered from harsh winds, creating a peaceful haven. Ancient evergreen trees stand sentinel along the edges of a clearing, their branches holding blankets of snow. The ground beneath you is firm, but not hard, with just enough give to make walking comfortable. In this protected space, the silence has a quality all its own, not empty, but full of subtle nuances. Listen closely and you might hear the distant call of a winter bird, the soft whisper of snow falling from a branch, the gentle creak of ice on a nearby stream, adjusting to the changing temperature as day moves toward evening. The air feels cool against your skin, invigorating rather than uncomfortable. Perhaps you imagine yourself dressed in warm layers that protect you perfectly from the cold, while allowing you to appreciate the refreshing winter atmosphere. There's a pleasant contrast between the cool touch of air on your face and the warmth contained within your clothing. As you breathe deeply, the air fills your lungs with revitalizing coolness. It carries the distinct scent of winter, clean snow, resinous pine, perhaps a hint of wood smoke from a distant dwelling. If you part your lips slightly, you might taste the purity of this mountain air, crisp and slightly sweet. In this moment, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. The mountains have stood for countless ages and will continue long after this moment passes. They remind us of the value in stillness, in being present without striving. Just as the mountains abide through changing seasons, through storms and sunshine alike, we too can find a center of calm that remains steady regardless of external circumstances. Know that whatever lies ahead in our story, you are completely safe. Your body is free to relax deeply while your mind enjoys the journey. You can let go of any need to remember or analyze what you hear. You can allow yourself to drift, to float, to follow the narrative as deeply or as lightly as feels right. As we transition now into our main story, allow yourself to settle even more comfortably. The mountain valley before you begins to take on more detail, colors deepening as the afternoon light shifts. The journey is about to begin, and you are perfectly prepared to experience it. High in the Cloud-Reach Mountains, where the air thinned to whispers and the snow lay undisturbed for centuries, lived an old mapmaker named Theron. He was a tall man, though age had begun to bow his shoulders, giving him the appearance of someone perpetually leaning forward to hear a quiet secret. His face was weathered like the mountains themselves, deep lines mapping the journeys of his 72 years. His eyes, however, remained clear and bright, the pale blue of a winter sky, set beneath thick white eyebrows that often frosted with ice on his excursions. Theron's home was unlike any other in the scattered mountain settlements. Rather than building on the protected slopes where most villagers dwelled, he had made his home directly into the mountainside, expanding a natural cave into a dwelling that was both modest and marvelous. The main chamber was circular with a domed ceiling, from which hung crystals that caught the light in spectacular ways. The stone walls were lined with shelves holding hundreds of maps. Some he had made himself, others collected from travelers over decades. A large hearth dominated one wall, currently glowing with a fire of aromatic pine that filled the space with warmth and comforting scent. The time was deep winter, when the mountains received their heaviest snows, and many paths became impassable. In the villages below, this was a season of gathering close, of storytelling and handcrafts done by firelight. But for Theron, winter had always been a time of quiet contemplation and detailed work. The isolation suited his temperament, allowing him to focus on his maps without interruption. The culture of the Cloud-Reach Mountains was ancient and deeply connected to the land. The people who lived here believed the mountains themselves were sentient in some fashion, holding memories and wisdom from times beyond human reckoning. They left offerings at certain stone formations, spoke respectfully of the mountain spirits, and taught their children to listen to the wind for messages. Therian had been born into this tradition and respected it, though his analytical mind had always sought tangible evidence of the mountain's awareness. Each morning, Theron followed the same gentle rhythm that had structured his days for decades. He rose just before dawn, when the darkness was beginning to soften, but stars could still be seen through the skylight above his bed. He moved slowly, deliberately, allowing his body to adjust to wakefulness without rushing. First came the tending of the fire, a task he approached with ceremonial care. He selected each piece of wood thoughtfully, appreciating its unique characteristics, this one with its intricate pattern of bark, that one with its subtle curve that would affect how it burned, the quiet sounds of wood shifting, the first soft crackling as new pieces caught flame, the gentle whoosh of air feeding the fire. These composed a familiar symphony that helped orient him to the new day. Next, he prepared a simple breakfast, usually a warm porridge of grains and dried berries, softened overnight in a ceramic pot nestled near the banked fire. As he stirred the mixture, adding a drizzle of precious honey from the valley apiaries, the cave filled with a sweet, meaty aroma that mingled pleasantly with the pine smoke. The first spoonful was always taken with closed eyes, a moment of gratitude for the sustenance and the day ahead. After breaking his fast, Theron would bundle in layers of wool and fur to step outside onto a wide ledge that fronted his cave dwelling. Here, he performed his daily weather observations, noting the quality of light, the direction and strength of the wind, the types of clouds, if any, were visible, the temperature as it felt against his exposed skin. He recorded these details in a small leather-bound journal, adding them to decades of similar observations that had made him the most reliable weather predictor in the region. On this particular morning, Theron noticed something unusual. The air was perfectly still, not even the slightest stirring against his face. The sky above was clear, a deep blue that seemed almost artificially perfect. The snow on distant peaks had a peculiar luminosity, as though lit from within. Most notable, however, was the silence. The mountains were always quiet, especially in winter. But this morning, the silence had a quality Theron had never experienced. Dense, expectant, almost palpable. He stood longer than usual on his observation ledge, breathing deeply of the cold air, feeling it fill his lungs with invigorating crispness. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks, turning their snow-covered surfaces to gold. Theron felt a curious sensation in his chest, a pleasant heaviness, like the comfort of a warm blanket, yet simultaneously a lightness, as though something within him was preparing to soar. He allowed these contradictory feelings to coexist, curious rather than concerned. Returning inside, Theron prepared for his day's work. His current project was a detailed map of a seldom visited valley to the north. Last summer, he had spent weeks exploring it, making careful notes and sketches. Winter was for transforming these rough drafts into finished maps, with all the precision and artistry he could muster. His workroom was smaller than the main chamber, but perfectly organized for his needs. A large table stood in the center, positioned to catch the best light from windows cut into the mountain rock and covered with oiled parchment to let in illumination while keeping out the cold. The tabletop was angled slightly, like a drawing desk, and currently held a partially completed map mounted on a wooden frame. Around the room were smaller tables holding his tools, pens of various thicknesses, inks in a rainbow of colors, measuring instruments, and magnifying glasses for the finest details. Theron settled onto his stool, wrapped a woolen blanket around his legs, and adjusted the oil lamp that would supplement the natural light. He breathed deeply, centering himself before beginning the delicate work. There was something profoundly satisfying in transferring his knowledge of the land onto paper, creating something that would help others navigate safely through difficult terrain. Each map was not merely a record of physical features, but a distillation of experience. Where the snow drifted deepest, which rock faces offered shelter from prevailing winds, which streams remained unfrozen even in the coldest months. As his pen moved across the parchment, adding the fine detail of a rocky outcropping, Theron found himself unusually aware of the sensations around him. The scratch of the pen tip seemed magnified, the smell of the ink more intense than usual. The woolen blanket across his lap felt extraordinarily soft against his hands when he paused to warm them. Even the quality of light coming through the windows seemed to hold more distinct colors than he typically noticed. By midday, hunger drew Theron from his work. He stretched, feeling the pleasant pull in muscles that had been still for hours. His lower back felt warm and slightly heavy, a familiar sensation after sitting at his work table. As he moved into the main chamber to prepare a simple meal, he noticed that the unusual silence from the morning persisted. Normally, he would hear occasional distant sounds, ice shifting on the mountainside, wind moving through crevices or the call of a raven. Today there was nothing but the sounds he himself made. His afternoon meal was simple. Bread he had baked 3 days prior, now slightly firm but still flavorful, accompanied by aged cheese from the Valley Dairy and preserved summer berries. He ate standing by the main window, gazing out at the mountain vista. The snow-covered peaks gleamed in the midday sun, so bright they almost hurt his eyes. The sky remained that impossible, perfect blue as he chewed thoughtfully, savoring the sharp tang of the cheese against the sweetness of the berries. Therein noticed a flicker of movement on a distant ridge. He narrowed his eyes, focusing intently. There it was again, something large moving along the ridgeline, a mountain goat perhaps, though they rarely ventured so high in deep winter. He set aside his plate and retrieved a polished brass spyglass from a nearby shelf. Through the magnified view, what he saw made his breath catch. It was not a goat or any other familiar mountain creature. The shape was massive, powerfully built, with what appeared to be great wings folded against its body. As Theron watched, the creature paused and turned its head, seeming to look directly toward his dwelling. Impossible at such a distance, and yet Theron felt seen in that moment. A shiver that was not entirely from cold ran through him. Griffin, the word surfaced in his mind unbidden. The creatures of ancient mountain lore, part eagle, part lion, wholly magical. Beings said to guard great treasures and possess wisdom beyond human understanding. Theron had included them on his maps as decorative elements, as all mapmakers did with legendary creatures, but he had never expected to see evidence of their actual existence. The creature moved on, disappearing behind an outcropping of rock. Theron continued to scan the ridge with his spyglass, but there was no further sign of the remarkable being. Had he truly seen it, or had his eyes been deceived by light and shadow playing on the snow? He could not be certain, yet the image remained vivid in his mind. The powerful haunches, the proud head, the great folded wings. Returning to his work table, Theron found it difficult to concentrate on the map before him. His thoughts kept returning to what he had glimpsed. If griffins truly existed in these mountains, how had they remained undetected for so long? What else might be dwelling in the remote heights, unknown to the people who lived in their shadow? He pulled an older book from his shelves, a collection of mountain legends recorded by a traveling scholar some 200 years before. He had referenced it occasionally for the traditional names of certain peaks and valleys, but now he turned to the section on magical creatures. The account of griffins was brief but intriguing. They were described as solitary beings, except during mating season, fiercely territorial, and possessing the ability to understand human speech, though they could not speak themselves. Most interestingly, they were said to be drawn to individuals with pure intent and authentic purpose. Theron pondered this phrase as the afternoon light began to wane. What constituted pure intent? His life's work had been mapping the mountains, making them more accessible and navigable for others. Was that a purpose the Griffins might respect? Or would they see human incursion into their domain as a threat? As evening approached, Theron prepared his supper, a hearty stew that had been simmering slowly at the edge of the hearth all day. The rich aroma of root vegetables and herbs filled the cave, bringing a sense of comfort and normalcy after the unsettling excitement of his possible sighting. He ate deliberately, savoring each spoonful, the warmth of the stew spreading through his body, and helping to ground his wandering thoughts. After his meal, Theron usually spent the evening hours reading or writing in his journal, but tonight he felt drawn back to the observation ledge. He wrapped himself in his heaviest fur cloak and stepped out into the bitter cold of mountain night. The stars overhead were spectacular, seemingly close enough to touch, their light sharp and clear in the thin air. The snow-covered landscape reflected their glow, creating a world of soft blue shadows and silver highlights. As he gazed across the familiar vista, now transformed by night, Theron became aware of a subtle change in the quality of the silence. It was still remarkably quiet, but now there was a sense of attention, as though the mountains themselves were listening. He stood very still, his breath forming clouds that dissipated slowly in the frigid air. "Is someone there?" He finally spoke aloud, his voice sounding strange after the prolonged silence. There was no response, yet the feeling of being observed intensified. Theron was not afraid. His long relationship with the mountains had taught him respect rather than fear, but he was acutely alert, every sense heightened. He remained on the ledge until the cold began to penetrate even his thick clothing, sending pleasant shivers across his skin and making his cheeks and nose tingle. Reluctantly, he returned inside to the welcome warmth of his fire as he prepared for sleep, arranging his bedding near the hearth and banking the fire to last through the night. Theron found himself unusually aware of every sensation. The softness of his woolen nightclothes against his skin, the gentle weight of blankets as he settled beneath them, the dancing patterns of firelight on the cave ceiling above. His mind continued to circle around what he had seen, or thought he had seen, that day. As a mapmaker, Theron prided himself on accurate observation. He was not given to flights of fancy or misinterpretation of evidence, and yet, Griffins belonged to legend, not to the physical world he had spent his life documenting. Could his eyes have deceived him? Or was there truly something extraordinary dwelling in the highest reaches of these mountains he thought he knew so well? With these questions still turning in his mind, Theron gradually surrendered to sleep, his breathing growing deep and regular, his body heavy and comfortable on his bed of soft furs. His last conscious thought was a decision to venture higher into the mountains tomorrow, weather permitting, to seek more conclusive evidence of what he had glimpsed. Theron woke before dawn, unusually alert despite the early hour. The quality of his sleep had been different, deeper than normal, filled with vivid dreams of flying over mountain peaks, seeing the familiar landscape from perspectives impossible for a human to achieve. He lay still for a few moments, enjoying the cozy warmth of his bedding against the chill air of the cave, feeling the pleasant weight of the furs across his body. Rising slowly, he moved through his morning routine with deliberate care. The fire needed more attention than usual, having burned lower than he typically allowed overnight. As he coaxed it back to vibrant life, adding small pieces of kindling and gently blowing to encourage the flames, Theron found himself unusually aware of the fire's details. The specific shade of blue at the heart of the flames, the varying sounds as different types of wood caught and burned, the way the heat felt against his face and hands. His breakfast preparation was similarly mindful. The porridge seemed especially flavorful this morning, the honey adding a complex sweetness that lingered pleasantly on his tongue. He ate sitting cross-legged on a cushion near the fire, feeling the gentle stretch in his hips and lower back, enjoying the contrast between the warmth of the food in his belly and the coolness of the air on his face. Outside, the day revealed itself to be perfect for a mountain excursion. The sky was clear, the air still, the snowpack firm underfoot, based on the testing steps Theron took on his observation ledge. The silence remained as profound as the previous day, with an added quality that Theron could only describe as anticipation. Though whether it was the mountains or merely his own excitement projecting onto his surroundings, he couldn't say. Prepared methodically for the journey, selecting equipment with the care of one who knows that proper preparation can mean the difference between life and death in the mountains. Into his leather backpack went a water skin, dried meat and fruit for sustenance, extra layers of clothing, fire-starting materials, basic medical supplies, his journal and drawing implements, a small spyglass, and several items useful for measuring distance and elevation, dressing in layers of wool and leather, with sturdy boots and gaiters to keep snow from entering them. Theron felt the familiar pleasure of preparing for exploration, though his main work was creating the final maps. The expeditions to gather information were what truly enlivened his spirit. There was nothing quite like the feeling of breaking trail through untouched snow, discovering the secrets a mountain chose to reveal to those patient and respectful enough to look closely. He locked his dwelling carefully, not out of fear of human intruders, as visitors were rare in deep winter, but to prevent curious mountain creatures from seeking shelter inside. During his absence, the heavy wooden door closed with a satisfying sound, the locking mechanism engaging with a solid click that seemed unusually loud in the profound silence. Theron began his ascent along a trail so familiar he could have followed it blindfolded. It wound upward through stands of ancient pine trees, their branches heavy with snow, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of the valleys below and distant peaks beyond. The snow was firm enough that he didn't require snowshoes, though he had brought them, strapped to his back in case conditions changed. The physical effort of climbing warmed him quickly, and he soon stopped to remove his outer fur layer, carefully packing it away. His breathing found a steady rhythm, syncing naturally with his pace. The sound of his footsteps crunching in the snow and his measured breath were the only interruptions to the mountain silence. As he climbed higher, the trees became sparser, more wine-sculpted, until finally he emerged above the tree line into a world of pure white and blue. The snow here was scoured by wind into fantastic shapes, waves, ridges, and smooth plateaus that transformed the mountain into an artist's canvas. The air was noticeably thinner, each breath providing less oxygen, requiring Theron to move more deliberately, with frequent pauses to rest and observe. It was during one such pause as he sat on his back enjoying a mouthful of dried apples that Theron noticed the tracks. At first, he thought they might belong to a mountain goat, but approaching for closer inspection, he realized that they were unlike any animal sign he had ever encountered. The impressions in the snow were massive, easily twice the size of his own booted foot, and showed what appeared to be a combination of bird-like talons at the front and paw prints at the back. Theron's heart quickened. These tracks matched descriptions of griffin footprints from the old legends, and they were fresh, made since the last subtle shift of snow from wind, which he estimated had been within the past few hours. He was not alone on the mountain. With renewed energy but greater caution, Theron continued upward, now following the mysterious tracks. They led toward a high ridge that had always marked the boundary of his explorations in this area. Beyond lay territory he had never mapped, partly due to its difficulty of access, partly out of a strange reluctance he had never fully examined. The tracks led straight up a slope that bordered on too steep for safe travel. Theron was forced to cut switchbacks, zigzagging upward while keeping the direct line of footprints in sight. The physical demand was significant, his thigh muscles burning pleasantly with effort, his breathing becoming deeper, more deliberate. Sweat formed under his layers despite the cold, creating an interesting contrast of sensations. The coolness of air on his face, the warmth of his exertion-heated body. When he finally crested the ridge, Theron stopped abruptly, momentarily disoriented. Before him stretched a valley he had never seen before, or more accurately, a valley he had seen only from distant vantage points and never recognized for what it was. Sheltered on all sides by steep mountain walls, it formed a natural sanctuary, invisible unless one stood precisely where he now stood. And it was inhabited. Below, scattered across the valley floor, were structures unlike any human dwellings Theron had ever encountered. They appeared to be nests, enormous constructions of branches, some partially covered with snow, others clearly maintained and kept clear. And moving among them were the Griffins. Theron slowly lowered himself to a crouch, not out of fear, but to present less of a silhouette against the sky. He counted 7 of the magnificent creatures. They varied in size and coloration, some with golden feathers that caught the sunlight brilliantly, others in deeper hues of brown and red. Their movements combined the majesty of great cats with the precision of birds of prey, a harmony of seemingly contradictory elements that somehow formed a perfect whole. From his pack, Theron carefully retrieved his small spyglass. Through its magnified view, he could see more details of the Griffins. Their beaks were formidable, curved and sharp, yet capable of delicate manipulation, as he observed one carefully arranging something in its nest. Their eyes were especially striking, large, forward-facing, with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and evaluative. These were not mere beasts, but beings with consciousness and purpose. As he watched, fascinated, one of the Griffins suddenly looked up in his direction. Theron froze, the spyglass still held to his eye. The Griffin continued to stare directly at his position, then made a sound, a piercing cry that combined elements of eagle screech and lion roar. Immediately, the other Griffins oriented toward the ridge where Theron crouched. 3 of them opened their massive wings and launched into the air with powerful downbeats that sent snow swirling upward. They circled briefly, then began flying directly toward Theron's position. His first instinct was to retreat, to scramble back down the way he had come. But some deeper wisdom kept him in place. Running would likely trigger a predatory response, and even if it didn't, he could never outpace flying creatures on mountainous terrain. Better to hold his ground and demonstrate peaceful intentions. Theron slowly stood to his full height, making himself visible. He extended his empty hands outward, palms up, in a universal gesture of peaceful greeting. His heart was pounding, but not entirely from fear. There was excitement too, and profound awe at being in the presence of creatures he had believed existed only in legend. The Griffins approached rapidly, their wingspans truly impressive as they grew closer, easily 20 feet from tip to tip. The sound of their wings pushing against the air was like distant thunder, a deep, percussive rhythm that Theron could feel in his chest as much as here. They landed on the ridge a cautious distance from him, close enough that he could feel the air displaced by their wings, far enough that he presented no immediate threat. The largest of the three, a magnificent creature with feathers, the deep gold of autumn sunlight and fur, the rich brown of fertile earth, stepped forward. Its eyes, a clear amber that seemed to hold inner light, fixed on Theron with undeniable intelligence. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Theron made no move, allowing the griffin to take the measure of this human who had ventured into their territory. He breathed slowly and deeply, aware of the crisp mountain air filling his lungs, the steady beat of his heart, the firm snow beneath his boots. There was fear, yes, but not panic. Rather, the appropriate respect one naturally feels in the presence of great power and ancient wisdom. The griffin made a soft sound, different from the alarm cry of earlier, a rumbling chirp that seemed to contain a question. It tilted its head slightly, continuing to examine Theron with those remarkable eyes. "I mean no harm," Theron said, quietly, unsure if the creature could understand his words, but hoping his peaceful tone would communicate his intention. "I am a map maker. I document the mountains so that others may travel safely." At the word mapmaker, the griffin's posture changed subtly. It made another sound, this one directed at its companions. The three seemed to confer, with different vocalizations and small movements that clearly constituted some form of communication. Theron remained still, fascinated by their interaction. Finally, the golden griffin turned back to Theron and made a deliberate gesture with its head, a clear invitation to follow. It spread its wings partially, moved a short distance along the ridge away from the valley, then looked back at Theron expectantly. With a mixtures of trepidation and excitement, Theron nodded and began to follow. The other two griffins took positions behind him, effectively escorting him between them. The snow crunched beneath his boots, while the griffins moved with surprising grace despite their size, leaving lighter impressions than he would have expected. They led him to a path he would never have discovered on his own, a narrow traverse cutting across what appeared from most angles to be a sheer cliff face. Here, the golden griffin paused and looked at him, then at the path, clearly indicating he should proceed. The path was narrow but navigable, requiring Theron's complete attention. He moved carefully, placing each foot deliberately, using his hands against the rock wall for balance when needed. The griffins did not follow on the narrow track, but launched themselves into the air again, circling overhead as he made his way across. The traverse led to a broad ledge and the mouth of a cave unlike any Theron had seen in his decades of mountain exploration. The opening was tall and symmetrical, almost as though it had been deliberately shaped rather than formed by natural processes. More striking were the markings around the entrance, symbols carved into the living rock, ancient beyond reckoning based on their weathered appearance. The griffins landed on the ledge and again indicated that Theron should proceed. The golden one made a soft, encouraging sound, almost gentle, despite coming from such a powerful being. The cave entrance led to a short tunnel, which opened into a chamber that left Theron momentarily speechless. It was vast, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows, despite the illumination that came from multiple sources. Narrow fissures in the rock that allowed daylight to enter, and what appeared to be naturally luminescent crystals embedded in the walls. The chamber was clearly a griffin dwelling. Several large nest-like structures were positioned around the perimeter, carefully constructed and lined with soft materials. But what captured Theron's attention most completely was the central area of the chamber, where a raised stone platform held what could only be described as a three-dimensional map of the entire mountain range. It was not carved or constructed in any conventional sense. Rather, it appeared to be formed of some crystalline substance that caught and reflected the light in ways that emphasized different elevations and features. It was incredibly detailed, showing aspects of the mountains that Theron knew well, alongside areas he had never explored or even seen from a distance. The golden griffin moved to the map and made a gesture with one talon, indicating a specific location. Theron approached cautiously, alert for any sign of discomfort from his hosts at his proximity to what was clearly a treasure of immense value. The indicated location was the very ridge where Theron had first sighted the griffin the previous day. The crystal map showed it with perfect accuracy, and also revealed something Theron had never noticed in his many years of observing that ridge, a series of caves, completely hidden from below, that apparently served as griffin dwellings. The griffin made another sound and gestured to a different location, Theron's own home. The accuracy was uncanny, down to the observation, ledge, and the precise shape of his cave dwelling. Then the griffin's talon moved across various paths, connecting different mountain features, some familiar to Theron, others completely unknown to him. Understanding dawned. The griffins had their own mental map of the mountains, developed over what must be countless generations. They were showing him their knowledge, sharing it with a fellow mapper of the terrain they called home. Theron felt a profound sense of humility and gratitude. This was a gift beyond price. Access to knowledge no human had ever been privileged to receive. He bowed deeply to the golden griffin, hoping the gesture of respect would translate across the species barrier. "Thank you," he said simply. "This is a great honor." The griffin made a sound that somehow conveyed acceptance and acknowledgement. It then did something unexpected. It extended one wing slightly, creating a space beside it at the map table, clearly inviting Theron to stand closer. For the next several hours, though time seemed strangely fluid in the Griffin Cave, Theron was given what could only be described as a tour of the mountains as the Griffins knew them, through gestures, sounds, and what felt increasingly like a form of direct mental communication that transcended language. They showed him hidden valleys, secret passes, dangerous areas to avoid, places of particular beauty or significance. Theron wished desperately for his mapping tools to record all this information, but he did his best to commit everything to memory, knowing he would transfer it to paper as soon as he returned home. The Griffins seemed to understand his dilemma and slowed their presentation when they sensed his struggle to retain complex details. As the light from the fissures began to dim with the approach of evening, the golden griffin made a new gesture, indicating the cave entrance. The message was clear. It was time for Theron to return home before darkness made mountain travel treacherous. He bowed again to each of the griffins, trying to convey his deep appreciation for what they had shared. The golden griffin responded by gently touching its beak to Theron's forehead, a moment of connection that sent a warm, peaceful sensation throughout his body. The return journey was much faster than the ascent had been. 2 griffins escorted him, showing him shortcuts he would never have discovered alone. They left him at the edge of the tree line, where the familiar trail to his dwelling began. The golden griffin made one final sound, a musical trill that somehow conveyed both farewell and a suggestion that this was not a final parting. Theron walked the familiar path home in a state of wonder, his mind full of the day's extraordinary experiences. The forest around him seemed somehow more alive, more present than ever before. He noticed details he had walked past countless times without seeing. The particular pattern of bark on an ancient pine, the way snow collected differently on north-facing branches, the subtle colors visible in what he had previously registered simply as snow and shadows. The air felt especially sweet in his lungs, the cold a clarifying presence rather than a discomfort. His body moved with pleasing efficiency, muscles warmed by the day's exertion, joints flexible and responsive. Even fatigue, which began to make itself known as he approached his dwelling, was a pleasant sensation, the earned tiredness of meaningful work. Reaching his cave home as the last light faded from the sky, Theron felt a new appreciation for the shelter he had created. He saw it now partly through griffin eyes, a well-chosen location, defensible, with good visibility and natural protection from the worst of the mountain weather. He built up his fire with careful attention, selecting each piece of wood for its qualities, appreciating the specific sounds and smells as the fire grew stronger. His evening meal, though simple, seemed imbued with extraordinary flavor. Dried meat reconstituted in a broth with wild herbs, accompanied by flatbread he had baked the previous week. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling the nourishment spread through his body. After eating, though, his mind was eager to begin transcribing what he had learned. Theron acknowledged the wisdom of allowing his physical experience to settle first. He prepared a cup of fragrant mountain tea, a blend of pine needles, dried berries, and a rare herb that grew only above the tree line, and sat before his fire, allowing the day's experiences to flow through his awareness without trying to organize or categorize them yet. The warmth of the fire seeped into his tired muscles, creating a pleasant heaviness. The tea spread its own warmth from within, its complex taste lingering on his tongue. Theron's breathing gradually slowed and deepened as his body settled into a state of comfortable relaxation. When he finally moved to his work table, lighting the special oil lamp he used for evening mapping, Theron felt a clarity of mind that was exceptional even for him. He selected his finest parchment and best inks, sensing that what he was about to create would be the most important map of his life. Working with deliberate care, he began to record what the Griffins had shown him. His hand moved across the parchment with a surprising sureness, as though guided by a wisdom beyond his own. Hours passed unnoticed as valleys, peaks, hidden paths, and secret places took form under his pen. He included notation systems of his own devising to indicate griffin dwellings and territories, careful to encode this information in a way that only he would fully understand. A protection for his new allies. The night deepened around him as he worked, the fire burning low, the oil in his lamp gradually diminishing. Theron remained alert despite the late hour, energized by the importance of his task. His body felt comfortably positioned on his work stool, his hands steady, his vision clear, even for the finest details. When he finally completed the initial version of what he already thought of as the Griffin map, the first hint of dawn was lightening the sky. Theron carefully secured the parchment to protect it from accidental damage, then finally allowed himself to seek rest. As he settled onto his sleeping furs, arranging the heavy blankets over himself to create a perfect nest of warmth, Theron felt a profound sense of contentment, unlike anything he had experienced before. His life's work of mapping the mountains had always brought satisfaction, but this new dimension, the knowledge shared by the Griffins, the connection with beings he had thought existed only in legend, added a depth of meaning that filled his heart to overflowing. His body felt pleasantly heavy, sinking into the softness of his bed. His breathing slowed naturally, becoming deep and regular as sleep began to claim him. Theron had a final thought. Tomorrow, he would return to the Griffin territory, this time bringing gifts, his own maps, showing human settlements and travel routes, knowledge to exchange for knowledge in the beginning of what he hoped would be a long and mutually beneficial relationship. With this gentle intention held in his mind, Theron drifted into sleep, his dreams filled with the soaring flight over familiar peaks, now seen from entirely new perspectives. The next morning arrived with a soft golden light filtering through the parchment-covered windows of Theron's cave dwelling. He woke naturally, his body feeling remarkably refreshed despite the short duration of his sleep. There was a pleasant weight to his limbs, a sense of being perfectly supported by his bed of furs that made the transition to wakefulness especially gentle. As he moved through his morning routine, stoking the fire, preparing a simple breakfast, washing with water warmed by the hearth, Theron found himself moving with deliberate mindfulness. Each action seemed to hold more significance, more presence, than it had before his encounter with the Griffins. The texture of the wooden spoon in his hand as he stirred his porridge, the changing colors of the flames as he added a new log to the fire, the particular way sunlight created patterns on his cave floor. All these details registered with unusual clarity. After eating, Theron spent time carefully selecting the maps he would bring to the Griffins. He chose those showing the human settlements in the valleys, the established trade routes between them, and several detailed maps of areas where humans frequently traveled for hunting or gathering. His intention was to provide information that would help the Griffins avoid unexpected encounters with humans who, unlike himself, might react with fear or hostility. He packed these precious documents carefully in a leather portfolio, along with several blank parchments and his mapping tools. Perhaps, if the opportunity presented itself, he could create maps directly in the Griffins' presence, showing them how human mapmaking worked. Theron also prepared a small gift, a pouch of rare tea leaves harvested from plants that grew only in specific protected valleys. He had noticed the Griffins' appreciation for certain aromatic plants in their nests, and thought they might enjoy these fragrant leaves, even if not for consumption. The day outside was crisp and clear, the snow sparkling in the morning sunlight as though scattered with countless tiny diamonds. The silence of the mountains was profound, but no longer felt strange to Theron. Rather, it seemed like a space created specifically for important encounters and realizations. As he secured his dwelling and prepared to set out, Theron was startled by a familiar sound, the musical cry of a griffin, much closer than he had heard before, except in their cave. Looking up, he saw the golden griffin circling above his home, its massive wings catching the sunlight, its movements graceful despite its size. The griffin landed on the wide ledge that fronted Theron's cave, its weight making hardly any sound on the packed snow. Up close, outside the confines of the cave, its majesty was even more apparent. It stood taller than Theron by at least 2 feet, its powerful body radiating strength, and its eyes holding that same unmistakable intelligence he had recognized the day before. "You've come to me this time," Theron said, smiling. "Welcome to my home." The griffin made a soft sound that somehow conveyed acknowledgement. It then did something unexpected. It lowered its body slightly and extended one wing outward, creating a space against its side. The invitation was unmistakable, though so surprising that Theron momentarily froze in place. The griffin wanted to carry him, to fly with him to their territory, rather than having him make the long climb. After a moment's hesitation, not from fear, but from sheer awe at what was being offered, Theron nodded and approached carefully. The griffin remained perfectly still as he climbed onto its back, positioning himself just behind where the powerful wings joined the body. The feathers under his hands were soft yet strong, radiating a gentle warmth despite the cold air. The fur where he seated himself was thick and plush, providing natural cushioning. "I'm ready," Theron said quietly, securing his pack and the leather portfolio against his body. The griffin made a small sound that seemed to communicate confirmation, then tensed its powerful muscles. Theron felt the massive body gathering itself beneath him, and then they were airborne, the great wings pushing down with force that lifted them immediately above the ledge. The sensation was unlike anything Theron had ever experienced. The initial surge of acceleration pressed him against the griffin's back, then gave way to a rhythm of movement that was surprisingly smooth. Each powerful wing beat created a gentle undulation that Theron quickly adapted to, flexing his knees slightly and moving with the griffin's flight rather than against it. And the view. Theron had thought he knew the mountains after decades of exploring them, but seeing them from above revealed an entirely new dimension. Valleys and ridges formed patterns he had never perceived from ground level. Streams and frozen lakes created a network of connections through the landscape. The relationship between different peaks became clearer, their relative positions and heights instantly apparent, in a way no ground-based observation could provide. The air grew colder as they ascended, the wind created by their passage making Theron grateful for his fur hood and thick gloves. His breath formed clouds that were immediately swept away. His cheeks and nose tingled pleasantly with the cold, while the heat from the griffin's body kept the rest of him comfortably warm. A fascinating contrast of sensations. They flew over the ridge where Theron had first discovered the Griffin Valley, then continued beyond it to areas he had never explored. The landscape below became increasingly rugged and dramatic. Deeper chasms, more vertical rock faces, peaks that seemed to scrape at the very sky. Yet even in this harsh terrain, the Griffin's flight remained sure and steady, navigating air currents with innate skill. Finally, they began to descend toward what appeared to be a sheer cliff face. As they approached, Theron saw that it concealed a narrow opening, a vertical crack in the mountain that would be nearly invisible from ground level, especially with the play of shadows on the rock. The Griffin slowed its flight, wings extending to their full impressive span to create drag. It maneuvered with with precision through the opening, which was much tighter than Theron would have thought possible for a creature of its size. Beyond was a protected canyon, a long, relatively narrow space enclosed by high rock walls that blocked the worst of the mountain winds while allowing sunlight to enter from above. They landed on a broad stone shelf about halfway up one wall of the canyon. The surface was worn smooth, clearly used regularly as a landing and takeoff point. Several other griffins were already present, some preening their feathers, others apparently engaged in conversation through their complex system of vocalizations and gestures. All activity ceased when Theron and his mount arrived. The gathered griffins, he counted 5 of varying sizes and coloration, turned to observe the human in their midst. There was no hostility in their posture or expressions, but rather intense curiosity and assessment. The golden griffin made a series of sounds that seemed to be an explanation or introduction. Theron carefully dismounted, taking a moment to find his balance on solid ground after the extraordinary experience of flight. He then bowed deeply to the assembled griffins, holding the gesture longer than human custom would dictate, intuiting that showing proper respect was important. When he straightened, the griffins had formed a loose semicircle around him. One stepped forward, smaller than his golden host, but with striking silver-tipped feathers that caught the light like polished metal. It made a soft, inquiring sound, acting on instinct. Theron slowly opened his leather portfolio and withdrew one of his finest maps, a detailed rendering of the main valley where human settlements were concentrated. He held it up for the griffins to see, then carefully placed it on a flat rock surface nearby. The reaction was immediate and fascinating. The griffins gathered around the map, their interest evident in the forward tilt of their heads and their focused gaze. The silver-tipped one made a gentle sound and extended one talon, clearly asking permission to touch the document. "Yes, of course," Theron said, nodding and making an encouraging gesture. With astonishing delicacy for a creature of its size and power, the griffin touched the map, tracing the inked lines representing rivers and roads. Its talon moved with precision, never tearing the parchment. The other griffins watched intently, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to be comments or questions among themselves. Theron unfolded several more maps, creating a display of his work that showed different aspects of the human presence in the mountains, where they lived, traveled, hunted, gathered resources. The griffins examined each with the same careful attention, sometimes conferring with each other through their unique communication. After they had studied the maps for some time, the golden griffin turned to Theron and made a beckoning gesture. It led him deeper into the canyon, with the other griffins following. They arrived at a large, flat area where the canyon floor widened and leveled. Here was something remarkable, what appeared to be a deliberately constructed space, with flat stones arranged in a circle around a central area covered with fine sand. The golden griffin used a talon to smooth an area of sand, then began to draw. Its movements were precise and deliberate, creating lines and shapes that Theron quickly recognized as a map, not of physical terrain, but of territories. The griffin was showing where different groups of their kind lived throughout the mountain range. Theron watched in fascination as a complex network of territories took shape. Some areas had definite boundaries, while others seemed to show overlapping zones or shared spaces. The golden griffin used different pressure to create varying depths in the sand, apparently indicating something about the importance or intensity of territorial claims. When the map was complete, the Griffin looked at Theron expectantly. Understanding dawned. This was an exchange of crucial information. The Griffins had shown him their physical world yesterday. Now they were showing him their social organization, their political landscape, and they had waited to do so until after examining his maps of human territory, perhaps evaluating whether he was trustworthy with such sensitive information. "Thank you," Theron said sincerely. "This is invaluable knowledge." He pointed to areas where Griffin territories overlapped with places humans frequently visited, asking with gestures and simple words, "Are these places of conflict?" The Griffin seemed to understand perfectly. It indicated some areas with a gesture that somehow conveyed affirmation, others with a different movement that suggested the situation was more complex. Through a remarkable combination of drawing in the sand, gestures, and vocalizations, supplemented by Theron's growing intuitive understanding of Griffin communication, a detailed picture emerged of the relationship between the two species across the mountain range. In some areas, humans had unknowingly violated Griffin nesting grounds, leading to the creatures relocating their young. In others, human activities such as hunting had depleted prey animals that the Griffins relied upon. Yet there were also places where the two species had achieved an unconscious balance, neither aware of the accommodations they had made for each other over generations. As this extraordinary exchange of information continued, Theron became aware of a subtle shift in the quality of light. Looking up, he realized that the sun had moved significantly across the sky. Several hours had passed while he was absorbed in communication with the Griffins. His body registered the time as well, a pleasant hunger growing, a slight stiffness in his legs from standing in one position for so long. The golden griffin apparently noticed his physical needs as it made a sound that interrupted the ongoing interaction. Several younger griffins who had joined the gathering as it progressed departed briefly and returned with what appeared to be offerings of food. A freshly caught mountain hare, already prepared in some fashion, and a collection of late-season berries preserved by the cold. Theron accepted these gifts with deep gratitude, finding a comfortable place to sit on a sun-warmed rock as he ate. The hare meat was surprisingly tender and flavorful, clearly prepared with some method unknown to humans. The berries burst with sweetness on his tongue, their taste intensified by the cold preservation. As he satisfied his hunger, Theron observed the Griffins going about various activities. Some continued to study his maps, others engaged in what appeared to be discussions about the sand map they had created together. A few younger ones engaged in what could only be described as play, mock aerial combats and acrobatic displays that demonstrated the incredible maneuverability of these beings despite their size. The scene filled Theron with a profound sense of privilege and wonder. He was witnessing a society as complex and rich as any human culture, yet entirely non-human in its foundations and expressions. The Griffins had social structures, methods of knowledge transmission, traditions, and relationships that had evolved separately from but parallel to human development. When he had finished eating, wiping his hands clean on a cloth from his back, and taking a refreshing drink from his water skin, Theron felt a renewed energy and focus. The golden griffin approached him again, making a sound that seemed to be an inquiry. "Yes, I'm ready to continue," Theron responded, standing and gathering his mapping materials. What followed was one of the most extraordinary days of Theron's long and eventful life. Together with the Griffins, he created a new kind of map, one that represented both species' understanding of the mountains they shared. Using both his inks on parchment and their sand drawing techniques, they developed symbols and notation systems that captured information valuable to both humans and griffins. They marked places where humans should be cautious during griffin mating seasons, where griffins should avoid during human hunting periods, paths that could be safely shared at different times of year, and locations of resources important to both species. It was slow, painstaking work, requiring patience and creativity to bridge the communication gap. But the results were unlike anything Theron had ever created or ever seen in the maps of even the most skilled human cartographers. As afternoon began to transition toward evening, Theron realized he had filled several parchments with this new collaborative cartography. His hand was slightly cramped from the detailed work, a pleasant ache that spoke of meaningful effort. His mind felt simultaneously stimulated and peaceful, activated by the intellectual challenge of cross-species communication, calmed by the deep sense of purpose and connection the work provided. The Griffins appeared to recognize the coming end of the day's work session. The Golden One made a sound that gathered the others' attention, then seemed to make a formal statement of some kind, accompanied by a gesture that included both Theron and the maps they had created together. One by one, the other Griffins approached Theron and made contact, some gently touching their beaks to his hand, others lightly brushing a wing against his shoulder. Each contact conveyed a sense of acceptance and respect that transcended the need for verbal language. When this ceremony was complete, the Golden Griffin extended its wing in the now familiar invitation. Theron carefully packed his maps and tools, securing the precious new collaborative documents with special care, then mounted the Griffins back for the flight home. The return journey revealed the mountains, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Long shadows stretched across valleys, creating dramatic contrasts that emphasized the terrain's contours. The air had grown colder as the day progressed, creating a crystalline clarity that seemed to sharpen every detail of the vast landscape below. Theron found the flight even more enjoyable than the morning's journey. His body had adapted to the rhythm of the Griffin's movement, allowing him to relax and fully appreciate the extraordinary experience. The wind against his face was invigorating, the warmth of the Griffin beneath him comforting, the changing patterns of the landscape below endlessly fascinating. They arrived at his cave dwelling just as the first stars were becoming visible in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. The Golden Griffin landed with gentle precision on the observation ledge and waited patiently as Theron dismounted. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, human and Griffin, mapmaker and flying being, two consciences aware of the significance of the bridge they were building between their kinds. Theron bowed deeply, then straightened and placed his hand gently on the Griffin's shoulder, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the soft feathers. "Thank you, my friend," he said softly. "Until tomorrow." The Griffin made a sound that perfectly conveyed similar sentiment, then launched from the ledge, powerful wings carrying it swiftly upward and away. Theron watched until it disappeared into the gathering darkness, then turned to enter his home, his mind and heart full of the day's experiences. Inside, he built up his fire with careful attention, enjoying the familiar routine after a day of such extraordinary novelty. The cave gradually filled with warmth and the comforting scent of burning pine. Theron prepared a simple evening meal Though he wasn't particularly hungry after the Griffins' generous provision earlier in the day, still, the hot tea and bread with preserved summer vegetables helped ground him in familiar routines. After eating, Theron carefully unfolded the collaborative maps on his work table, examining them in the warm light of his oil lamp. They represented something unprecedented, a literal and figurative common ground between humans and Griffins. In the morning, he would begin creating finished versions, integrating their rough drafts into polished documents that could potentially guide both species toward more harmonious coexistence. As he prepared for sleep, arranging his bedding near the hearth and adding a final log to the fire, Theron felt a profound sense of purpose, unlike anything he had experienced in his long career as a mapmaker. His maps had always been meant to guide and protect travelers, but now they could serve a higher purpose, fostering understanding between different kinds of beings who shared the same mountain home, settling beneath his blankets, feeling their comforting weight and warmth. Theron allowed his body to relax completely. His muscles, pleasantly tired from the day's activities, gradually released any remaining tension. His breathing slowed and deepened naturally. As he drifted toward sleep, his mind filled with images of flight, of soaring between mountain peaks, of seeing the world from perspectives impossible for a human alone. His last conscious thought was a realization that in seeking to map the physical world, he had discovered something far more valuable, a map of connection between different forms of consciousness, a pathway of understanding that transcended the limitations of separate species. With this thought held gently in his awareness, Theron slipped into deep, peaceful sleep. The following days established a new pattern in Theron's life, one so fulfilling that he sometimes wondered how he had ever been content with his solitary existence before. Each morning, the golden griffin would arrive at his ledge just after sunrise. Together they would fly to different parts of the mountain range, sometimes returning to the griffin community in the hidden canyon, other times exploring new territories that neither had fully mapped before. These journeys combined the precision of map-making with the joy of discovery and the deep satisfaction of growing cross-species understanding. Theron learned to recognize different griffin familial groups by their coloration patterns and vocalizations. He began to understand their social structures, how leadership was determined not by combat or lineage, but by demonstration of wisdom and contribution to community knowledge. The Griffins, in turn, developed a deeper understanding of human settlements and activities. Through Theron's maps and explanations, they came to recognize seasonal patterns in human behavior, the meaning of different types of structures, and the varying attitudes different human communities held toward mountain creatures. On the 5th day of this new partnership, as they soared above a particularly remote valley, the golden griffin, whom Theron had come to think of as Sunwing, though no formal name had been exchanged, made a unique sound and changed direction abruptly. They flew toward what appeared to be an ordinary rock face. But as they approached, Theron saw a narrow opening partially concealed by an outcropping. The griffin landed on a small ledge before this opening and waited for Theron to dismount. The entrance was just large enough for them to enter single file, with the griffin folding its wings tightly against its body. Beyond was a short, dark tunnel that opened into a space so extraordinary that Theron gasped aloud. It was a perfect circular chamber with a domed ceiling, similar in shape to Theron's own main room, but many times larger. The walls were lined with a crystalline substance that caught and amplified the light entering through a small opening in the dome, creating a gentle illumination that filled the space. The floor was smooth, polished stone, with a circular pattern inlaid in materials of different colors, but most remarkable was what occupied the center of the chamber, an immense three-dimensional representation of the entire mountain range, far more detailed and comprehensive than the one he had seen in the Griffin Cave days earlier. This was clearly ancient work, the materials aged by centuries, if not millennia, yet the accuracy was uncanny. Sunwing made a soft sound that somehow conveyed both reverence and excitement. It gestured for Theron to approach the central map, then made a series of movements around it that seemed ceremonial in nature. Understanding dawned slowly as Theron observed the Griffin's behavior and the details of the chamber. This was a sacred space, a repository of Griffin knowledge accumulated over countless generations, and he was being invited to share it, to add human knowledge to this ancient record. Over the next several hours, Theron witnessed something he would never have believed possible. Sunwing somehow activated the crystalline map, causing certain areas to glow with inner light as they communicated about different territories. When Theron described human settlements or activities in specific regions, those areas would illuminate in response, as though the map itself was listening and recording this new information. By the time they left the chamber, the afternoon was well advanced, the light beginning to soften toward evening. Theron felt profoundly changed by the experience, not just by the extraordinary technology or magic, he couldn't determine which, of the ancient map, but by the trust implicit in showing him such a clearly sacred and secret place. The flight back to his dwelling was quiet, both Theron and Sunwing seemingly absorbed in their own reflections on the day's significance. The mountains below were bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, shadows stretching and deepening in the valleys, peaks glowing with captured sunlight. The air had the perfect crispness of deep winter, each breath refreshing and energizing. As they approached his home, Theron noticed something unusual. Smoke rising from the observation ledge. Someone had made a fire outside his cave dwelling. Sunwing noticed it too, a slight tension entering its powerful body beneath him. When they got closer, Theron saw a small group of people, 3 figures bundled in winter clothing, gathered around a carefully contained fire on the stone ledge. As Sunwing circled cautiously, Theron recognized them. Elders from the main valley settlement, including Mara, the village's senior healer and his oldest human friend. They looked up at the approaching Griffin with expressions of awe and trepidation, clearly having never expected to witness such a sight. Sunwing made a questioning sound, and Theron patted its neck reassuringly. "They are friends," he said. "They mean no harm." The Griffin landed at a respectful distance from the visitors, allowing Theron to dismount. There was a moment of profound silence as the human elders and the Griffin regarded each other across the ledge, separated by the small fire and centuries of mutual ignorance. Theron moved to stand between them, suddenly aware of his unique position as a bridge between these 2 worlds. "Friends," he said to the elders, "I would like you to meet my new ally and teacher." To Sunwing, he made a gesture of introduction and respect. Mara was the first to recover from astonishment. She stepped forward and bowed deeply to the Griffin, a gesture that transcended species barriers in its clear communication of respect. "We came seeking Theron when he did not make his usual monthly visit to the village. she explained, her voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. We feared the winter might have brought harm. Sunwing regarded the elders with intelligent eyes, then made a sound and gesture to Theron that somehow conveyed both caution and curiosity. Theron nodded in understanding. My friend must return to their home before darkness falls completely, he explained to the elders. But if you are willing to stay the night, there is much I would share with you after Sunwing's departure. A magnificent sight as the Griffin launched from the ledge, great wings catching the last golden rays of sunlight. Theron welcomed the elders into his dwelling as they warmed themselves by his hearth, shedding outer layers of fur and wool. He began to explain the remarkable events of the past days. Initially skeptical, they became increasingly fascinated as he showed them the collaborative maps he and the Griffins had created together. By the time the night was well advanced, the initial fear and uncertainty had given way to excitement about the possibilities this new relationship presented. This could change everything, Mara said thoughtfully, her weathered hands gently touching one of the maps. If we can establish true communication with the Griffins, perhaps we could do the same with other mountain beings we've glimpsed but never understood. The conversation continued late into the night, plans and possibilities unfolding like the map spread across Theron's table. When they finally sought rest, sleeping on furs, Theron arranged near the hearth. There was a sense of standing at the threshold of a new era for both humans and Griffins in the Cloudreach Mountains. The following morning brought heavy snow, thick, soft flakes falling steadily from a sky the color of dove feathers. Theron and his guests watched from the observation ledge, understanding that no Griffin would fly in such conditions, and no human would safely travel the mountain paths back to the village. It seems we are meant to have more time for discussion, Elder Jorel said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Perhaps to ensure we fully understand the importance of what you've discovered. They returned inside, where Theron prepared a hearty breakfast for his unexpected guests. As they ate, seated in a circle near the fire, the conversation naturally returned to the potential future relationship between humans and Griffins. We must proceed with great care, said Lanny, the third elder, who had spoken little the previous evening. Our histories tell of times when humans reacted with fear to mountain beings, hunting them or driving them from territories they had long inhabited. Yes, Theron agreed, and the Griffins have their own memories of conflicts, but they also have wisdom beyond anything I've encountered. They understand the value of cooperation, of shared knowledge. What do they want from us? Mara asked, her healer's mind always practical. All relationships involve exchange. What can we offer beings so powerful and self-sufficient? Theron considered this question carefully, warming his hands around his teacup. I believe they seek understanding, recognition. They have watched us for generations, adjusting their territories and habits to accommodate our expansion, largely without our awareness. Perhaps acknowledgement alone has value, the simple recognition that we share these mountains with other intelligent beings worthy of consideration and respect. The discussion continued throughout the day, occasionally circling back to practical concerns, how to introduce the idea to the wider human communities, which individuals might be best suited for initial, wider contact, what protocols might prevent misunderstandings or conflicts. By evening, when the snowfall finally began to lighten, They had drafted the beginnings of what Joral called a treaty of mutual recognition, a framework for gradually expanding the circle of humans aware of and in communication with the Griffins. It must begin small, Theron cautioned. A few trusted individuals from each human settlement, meeting perhaps once per season with Griffin representatives in neutral territory. And children, Mara added unexpectedly. We should include some children in these meetings from the beginning. They have fewer preconceptions, greater openness to difference. They will be the ones to carry this relationship forward. The snow stopped completely during the night, and morning revealed a transformed landscape. Every surface covered in pristine white, tree branches bowed under the weight of snow. Familiar shapes rendered new and wondrous by their glistening, covering. The air was perfectly still and cold, the silence complete, except for the occasional soft sound of snow falling from an overburdened branch. While the elders prepared for their journey back to the village, Theron stepped onto his observation ledge, breathing deeply of the crisp air, feeling it cool and refresh his lungs. The mountains seemed especially majestic this morning, their power and presence emphasized by the fresh snow blanketing their massive forms. A familiar cry drew his attention upward. Sunwing was circling high above, having navigated the snow-heavy air to check on him. Theron waved, feeling a surge of warmth and connection. The griffin circled once more, its golden feathers catching in the morning sunlight brilliantly against the blue sky, then flew toward the distant peaks where its kind dwelled. As Theron watched Sunwing disappear into the distance, he felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where and who he was meant to be. His lifelong work of mapping the mountains had led to this unexpected bridge between species, this opening of communication where none had existed before. Whatever came next, the gradual expansion of contact, the inevitable complications and adjustments, the slow building of trust, he would face it with the patience and perspective the mountains themselves had taught him. The elders joined him on the ledge, ready for their descent to the village. Mara stood beside him, following his gaze to the distant peaks. "You've done something remarkable, old friend," she said softly. "You've redrawn the map of what's possible." Theron smiled, still looking toward the mountains where his griffin allies dwelled. "We've only just begun," he replied. "The true mapping will be done by those who come after us, those who grow up knowing from the start that we share these mountains with others equally deserving of respect and recognition." Together they stood for a moment longer in the brilliant morning light, human elders and the mapmaker, who had expanded not just knowledge of the physical world, but of what kinds of connections were possible between different minds, different ways of being. Then, with a final look towards the Griffin territories, they began their careful descent, leaving tracks in the fresh snow that would soon be covered by new falls. Yet knowing that the path they had opened would remain, Theron continued his life in the mountains, his days now divided between periods of solitary map-making, visits to human settlements, to slowly share knowledge of the Griffins, and magnificent flights with Sunwing to continue their work of collaborative cartography. Seasons turned, snow melted and fell again. The rhythm of mountain life continued, yet with a new harmony as humans and Griffins began their careful dance of mutual recognition and respect. In his cave dwelling, late at night, when the fire had burned low and the mountains outside were bathed in starlight, Theron often found himself reflecting on how a lifetime of lonely observation had ultimately led to profound connection. His maps had become bridges rather than mere representations of terrain, linking different forms of consciousness across the divides of species and history. As he settled into sleep each night, feeling the comforting weight of his blankets, the pleasant relaxation of his aging body on the soft furs of his bed, Theron would often revisit in memory the moment of first flying with Sunwing, the extraordinary sensation of lifting from the earth, of seeing the beloved mountains from an entirely new perspective. In that memory, repeated so often it had acquired the quality of a meditation, he found a perfect metaphor for what had been accomplished and what remained to be done. We must all be willing to leave the ground of our assumptions, he thought, as sleep approached. We must all be willing to see with new eyes. We must all be willing to trust enough to soar. With these gentle thoughts held in his awareness, Theron would drift into dreams where mountains spoke, griffins sang, and the boundaries between different kinds of minds dissolved like morning mist in sunlight. And somehow, across the barrier of sleep, these dreams seemed to connect with something larger, a shared consciousness where all mountain dwellers, human and non-human alike, participated in a continuous creation of meaning and relationship that would endure long after individual lives had passed into memory and legend. As we draw our story to a close, let us take a moment to settle more deeply into relaxation. Imagine Theron in his mountain home, the fire burning low, his body settling heavily into his bed of soft furs. With each breath, he feels a deeper sense of peace, a profound contentment with his place in the world. The weight of the blankets feels comforting against his body, a gentle, even pressure that helps release any remaining tension. His breathing becomes slower, deeper, each exhale carrying away any lingering thoughts or concerns, leaving only a quiet awareness of the present moment. Outside, the mountains stand silent under the stars, their ancient presence a reminder of the vastness of time, the continuity of existence beyond individual experience. The snow reflects the starlight, casting a soft blue glow that seeps through the parchment-covered windows of Theron's dwelling. Inside, the warmth of the banked fire creates a perfect contrast to the cold mountain night. The scent of pine smoke lingers in the air, familiar and comforting. Occasional soft sounds, the settling of a log in the fire, the faint whisper of wind around the mountainside, only emphasize the profound quietness of this high, remote place. As Theron drifts deeper into sleep, his mind revisits moments from his extraordinary experiences, the sensation of flying between mountain peaks, the intelligent gaze of Sunwing meeting his own, the careful creation of maps that bridge different worlds of understanding. These images come not as active thoughts, but as gentle impressions, passing through his awareness like clouds across the mountain sky. The lessons of his journey settle into his being, the value of patience, the possibility of connection across seemingly insurmountable differences, the importance of seeing familiar landscapes from new perspectives. These understandings become part of who he is, influencing not just what he knows, but how he moves through the world. Like Theron, we too can carry these understandings with us as we drift toward sleep. We can release the need to solve problems or plan for tomorrow. We can allow our bodies to be fully supported, completely at rest. We can settle into the quiet awareness that we are held in a world of meaning and connection, even as our conscious minds begin to let go. Feel how your body has become increasingly heavy and relaxed throughout our story. Notice the comfortable weight of your limbs, the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the peaceful calm that comes with allowing yourself to rest completely. Just as Theron found peace in his mountain home, you can find perfect comfort right where you are. The mountains will still be there in the morning. The Griffins will continue their ancient flights between the peaks. The work of building understanding across differences will continue. But for now, there is only this moment of perfect rest, this gentle transition towards sleep. As we bring our story to a final close, imagine once more the view from on the above, the mountains, snow-covered peaks stretching to the horizon, valleys nestled between them, the intricate patterns of the landscape revealed from this soaring perspective. Carry this image of beauty and possibility with you into your dreams, letting it remind you that there is always more to discover, always new ways of seeing the familiar world. Rest now, knowing that like the ancient mountains themselves, you are exactly where you need to be. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as peaceful as a snow-covered mountain under stars. The mountains stand silent under the night sky. Snow covers every surface, pristine and glistening in the starlight. The air is perfectly still, the silence deep and complete. In his cave dwelling, Theron lies beneath warm furs, his body heavy and relaxed. His breathing is slow and deep, his mind floating in that peaceful space between wakefulness and sleep. Images from his day's journey with the Griffins drift through his awareness, soaring between mountain peaks, the world spread out below in all its vast beauty. With each breath, he sinks a little deeper into comfort and relaxation. The weight of his body against the soft bedding feels perfect, supporting him completely. The warmth of the furs creates a pleasant heaviness in his limbs, a gentle invitation to surrender to rest. As sleep begins to claim him, Theron's thoughts become simpler, more elemental. The mountains, the sky, the Griffins, the connection between different forms of life. These concepts flow through his mind, not as active thoughts, but as gentle impressions, like shadows of clouds moving across a distant landscape. His breath continues its steady rhythm, each inhale bringing fresh mountain air into his lungs, each exhale releasing any remaining tension from his body. The sound of his breathing mingles with the occasional soft crackle from the banked fire, creating a soothing background to his journey towards sleep. Outside, the stars wheel slowly in their ancient patterns above the mountain peaks. Inside, Theron's consciousness begins to loosen its hold on wakefulness, drifting toward dreams of flight and discovery, of new maps and deeper understandings. You too can follow this gentle path toward rest. With each breath, allow your body to become heavier, more relaxed. Feel the surface beneath you, supporting you completely. Notice how your breathing has naturally slowed and deepened as you've listened to our story. Like Theron in his mountain home, you can release the concerns of the day, letting them drift away like mist from a mountainside. You can allow your mind to quiet, your thoughts to simplify and slow. You can give yourself the permission to surrender to the natural rhythm of breath and heartbeat that guides you towards sleep. Feel the comfort of knowing you are safe, supported, exactly where you need to be. Allow your awareness to soften around the edges, to become less focused, more diffuse. Let the boundary between listening and dreaming begin to blur, just as the boundary between day and night blurs during twilight in the mountains. The mountains stand snow-covered and serene. The Griffins rest in their hidden valleys. The stars continue their silent journey across the night sky. And you, like Theron, can rest deeply and completely, carried on the gentle current of breath towards sleep and dreams. Breathing in peaceful mountain air. Breathing out, letting go of the day. Breathing in starlight and stillness. Breathing out, surrendering to rest. Breathing in the safety of your own space. Breathing out, drifting towards sleep. The mountains abide through countless nights. The Griffins dream their ancient dreams. And you can rest deeply and completely, knowing that the world continues its gentle turning as you sleep. Good night and peaceful dreams.